first, tell me your name.
James Detherage.
Okay, and when did you first come to the Westchester area?
I started in Westchester in December of 91.
Okay.
I mean 71. Cut.
Did you live here before that?
No.
Okay, how did you come to live here?
Small town in Hamilton County. I met a young lady, and then once we got married, I was working in a small town in Hamilton County as a volunteer fireman and a policeman, and got married. And Westchester, Union Township at that time, was starting to hire full-time policemen. And she was from Westchester.
Okay.
She was raised, went to high school in Lakota and this and that. So I applied for the policeman's job in Union Township, and they hired me in December of 71. So we moved all of our belongings to Westchester.
Okay, but you moved here as a police officer. I didn't know that.
I came as a police officer in December. It was a total volunteer fire department at that time, and since I worked a swing shift, I was off, mornings, daytime, 2 months out of 3, and they were having trouble getting volunteers during the day, and I wasn't going to volunteer for the fire department up here because of the small kids and this and that. And my wife and I talked about it, and I can maybe help the community, especially during the day. Mm-hmm. So February of 72, I joined the volunteer fire department.
Wow. So how long were you still a police officer?
I was a police officer until I was appointed chief in 77.
Okay.
So I was promoted to a police sergeant, and continued to work full-time with the police department, and volunteered, and I was promoted to a captain in the volunteer fire department. And then they started talking about a full-time fire chief, and talking about the changes necessary with the growth of the community.
Okay.
And I decided to apply for the fire chief's job.
Okay. So this is a whole new revelation to me about this police department. I didn't know that about you.
Oh, really?
So what was it like being a police officer here in the early 70s?
Well, actually a little scary. When I started up here, I think I was the sixth full-time police officer hired, and they still had part-time policemen as well, but you used to work by yourself. I mean, you were the only one patrolling the township, and of course the county sheriff was in and out as well. But I was from Hamilton County. All the streets are T intersections, and the neighbors are very close together. And
right.
Coming out here and was a new position that really kind of shocked me. And at that time, 2 weeks into the job, I was put on third shift. So trying to look at the street guide when you get a call and watch traffic, and of course there was no stoplights, no traffic lights to stop at, but there was a few stop signs. So it was interesting. It was very, very interesting.
A lot of open country then.
A lot of open country.
Yeah.
A lot of open country. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So then you became fire chief in 77?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and you were the first fire chief for the township.
First full-time fire chief.
Full-time fire chief.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that like? I mean, you had been a part-time firefighter and a full-time police officer, and now you're going to be the fire chief. So.
Well, it was very interesting, very intriguing. I mean, I thought about it for a long time, but decided to apply for the job and take the test. And then after I was there, then it really got fun, because as a firefighter, you don't really go into everything that the fire chief has to do. Your responsibilities of the fire chief and by state code and so on and so forth. So it was a real learning curve, very quick learning curve, as to what was required of the fire chief and what the budget process and the hiring process and the dealing with people process that I never really had that much, involvement in.
Right.
So for the first couple of years, it was a very, very interesting time, very time consuming. It took a lot of time to get my feet on the ground and set up an inspection program and fire prevention program we hired a couple full-time people to help me with inspections and training and this and that. So it was a very busy time.
So other than the full-time fire chief position, and you had a couple inspectors and that kind of thing, was the rest of the department still part-time, all part-time?
Rest of the department was still volunteer.
All volunteer.
And as the township continued to grow, well, we progressed with it and changed our stations around. When I was hired, there were 3 stations, two big garages to hold apparatus, and then headquarters had a training room and a small kitchenette. So as we continued to grow and the demand for service continued to get more, and the township growing out away from the nucleus, our response times started to suffer. So we started making arrangements for volunteers to stay at the station to at least run the medic unit or the ambulance, and just continue to grow from there. Stations were remodeled, additions were put on, and the growth of the fire department tried to stay up with the growth of the township.
Right, just grow, right? Those first 3 fire stations, so where were they? Cincinnati Dayton Road?
Cincinnati Dayton Road, John Road, and then on Duff Drive.
Okay, so those were the first 3.
Yes.
Was there always EMS, or did EMS start later?
No, EMS was right along with the fire department.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I seem to recall some pictures of an old EMS unit. It kind of, to me, it looks like a giant station wagon.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. An Oldsmobile station wagon.
That's pretty interesting. So what kind of calls were you getting for the fire department back then?
Well, back then, it was a lot of field fires, grass fires in the summer months, and barn fires. We did get some house fires, not as many barns and outbuildings and grass fires as normal, and we had some really good, well, I shouldn't say good, but auto accidents that were pretty intense at times on some of the back roads and curves and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. I still remember very early in my career, we were dispatched to an auto accident with injuries at Roslow's Curve. Well, with me being a new young guy up here, Roslow's Curve. Now I've never heard that street before. I wonder where that is. And of course, all I did was hightail to the station and got on the apparatus, and the guy that drives the apparatus knew where Roslow's Curve was. And we got several calls that were, near Keener Farm, this and that type of thing, instead of addresses. And most of the people on the fire department knew the township, and that just came along with time, that you started learning people's names and farmers' names and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You didn't know all the street names, and there may not have even been that many street names.
At one time, I could go on any call and not have to get my street guide out, and I knew where I was going at one time. Uh-huh. But from then on, it was pretty much, we had to have a street guide, and the dispatchers were up on giving us directions as well. But the roads really started coming in, and response time was difficult because of the area that we started to cover, and it just grew from there.
Yeah. When do you recall seeing this change that, with all this new residential development, people moving here, new houses and all of that? When did you start, do you recall kind of starting sensitive change?
Actually, it was in the early 80s, best of my recollection, that it really seemed like it was booming in every direction. Before that, there was a development in here or there, whatever. But and it seemed like in the early 80s, mid 80s, it just, every corner of the township was starting to develop and starting to build and require service.
So it was a kind of a small team. I assume you still had a lot of contact with the police department in those early days. I know even later in your career, police and fire are always connected, but back then I have to assume that you guys went on a lot of calls together or worked together.
No, back then the police department was always making our runs as well.
Okay.
They were always responding as well. But as time progressed, they got busier, and then they started dropping off on some of the runs because they just didn't have the time to make them. That if it wasn't a real bad or difficult run, well, they didn't make that. Field fires, things like that. But we worked very closely at that time because they were a growing department. They were adding people right and left, and we worked very closely at that time.
So those early fire trucks, right, that, now we have these huge aerial trucks and all that kind of stuff happening. So what were those early fire trucks like? And I hate to say it early because it was in the 70s.
Well, but when I first came up here in 1971, the primary truck out of Station 2 in Pisgah was a 1955 GMC.
Wow.
And that was a used truck that the department had bought when they started up. So it wasn't. It was later, but it was still early apparatus. And by the time I took over as chief, the trucks had been upgraded. There was this couple 67 model pumpers, and there was a 1970 pumper that they had just purchased just shortly before I got up here. So it was interesting, but they were all two-door cabs, and firefighters hanging off the back going down the road, and it was nothing to be putting your boots on or your coat on, one hand holding the bar, and you're getting dressed while the fire truck's going down the road, type of thing. Yeah. And of course, that's unheard of nowadays. If you're not in an enclosed cab, you just don't make the run.
You don't go, yeah. So when you became fire chief, you talked about it a little bit. You had to learn this administrative side of government, I assume, and that was a bit of a learning curve. You said
Yes, it was.
Yes,
it was.
Budget and all of that was not part of your original dream in public safety.
Budgets, retirement systems, health care for everybody, and really disciplinary actions. As far as counseling and evaluating and hiring procedures, and so it was kind of a new ball game for the whole department really, because we changed the hiring procedures and instituted some more training and to try to keep up with the growing community.
Right, and you saw a lot of change in the political atmosphere and trustees. You worked with a lot of different trustees, and how were those interactions over the years? I mean, we know our trustees now are always very supportive of public safety. Has it always been that way?
Yes, really it has. I was. There were times, obviously, in any given area. There are times, but over the years, the fire department, the trustees, the administration was very supportive. They understood growth of the community meant growth of public safety, and they were very supportive and participated in our budget process. They were very understanding. Of course, there's no politician that wants to put tax levies on, but they were very supportive in providing tax levies and funding when it was necessary. And of course, that goes right along with the citizens. There was never a tax levy voted down in all my years as working for the township. So the administration was understanding, the citizens were understanding, and of course it was up to the fire department then to go and take the money and do what was right and build the department and grow the department into what it is.
Yeah. So you had a volunteer part-time firefighting crew as chief initially, and how long were you fire chief here?
30 years.
30 years. So you saw the staffing grow, of course.
Yes.
So what was staffing at when you left? Do you remember?
I'm best of my recollection, it was around 40 full-time people and close to 100 part-time people.
Okay.
No.
Did you, so that happened kind of exponentially, I suppose, over those 30 years that it would grow. And do you remember the decision to start having full-time firefighters, that move? And
Well, it's an interesting question because there was one trustee when I was first promoted to chief. At one of our very early meetings, he made it real clear. He says, "Now don't come in here wanting to hire more full-time people." And of course, and I understood that. That was a real step for them to hire a full-time chief. But I think it was about 2 years after I was chief, the inspections on commercial and residential or industrial properties had to be taken care of, and training for the volunteers and the part-time people, and it was just something that one person couldn't do. So we did start hiring a couple full-time people. Our first hire was through a federal CETA program, and we hired 4 firefighters. And actually, Chief Tony Goller was one of those original hires way back when. So, and he went through the ranks and became chief after I did. But, and it was there was 4 on the first go around, and then we just hired 2, 3, 4 as time progressed, money allowed, and continued to build the nucleus. At least we had a few full-time people at each station to get the apparatus out, and the volunteers then came to the scene to take care of the situations. And it was just one of those attrition things that, you add a full-time person here and there. And then we, was in '99 when we added 2 more stations to the township. Excuse me. The station 4 and 5 was opened up in '99, and of course now that was interesting as well, because as we planned those stations and started building those stations, well, we had to hire people and have them trained and experienced to house those stations, when they came online.
Right.
Then we had to buy apparatus to have in those stations because we didn't have anything sitting around for them. So it was a very, very busy time in '97, '98, and early '99 when we opened those other 2 stations. But then we added, the 2nd and 3rd ambulance on duty, and actually it was about 30 years of continual growth. There was never any status quo to amount to anything. You never had 5 years of not buying a piece of apparatus, or not hiring somebody, or not growing.
so how did the volunteer firefighter deal work? I mean, I hear stories about, they dropped tones and then people knew they had to report, or that kind of thing.
When they started the department in '63, there were 4 women that did the dispatching from their home. They set up dispatch centers in these people's homes and had the phones ring into there, and they dispatched. They were on call, each, not all of them at once, obviously, but so you would get usually a fireman's wife that would be dispatching for you, and that happened up until they started the police department, and the full-time police department. And then they moved into the basement of Firehouse 2 on John Road and set up the dispatch center there, and then started hiring full-time dispatchers as well to take care of the police and emergency fire EMS calls.
So did you, you were chief for 30 years. The fire department is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. So you were chief for half of the time that the fire department's been around.
Now you're really making me feel old.
But I mean, that's a significant time. That's just huge changes in fire service in general. How do you, I mean, you talked a lot about it always changing and always evolving. And I mean, when you look back, how do you feel about your career? I mean, what was it?
Well, I don't know whether anybody will agree with me, but I'm very happy with it. I feel like we started a fire prevention program, we started a better training program, we started a hazardous materials unit, we started a paramedic service, we started technical rescue service, and just a number of things that a lot of volunteer departments don't have that even today. A lot of departments don't have that today. They depend on help from other departments. Now, of course, I didn't do that myself. I had a lot of help from dedicated people within the department that understood, we needed those things as well. And of course, those things came along as a result of the growth of the township. When you get a chemical company that builds in your township, and you have 3 railroads going through the township and an interstate highway, hazardous materials was a major issue that we felt had to be addressed, and we did. And we bought a specialized truck in '94 to handle hazardous material incidents. Technical rescue, we had a lot of construction going on. We had some major accidents involved in construction sites, a couple trench collapses. So we started a technical rescue, trench collapse training team. And so the township kind of dictated what we did, but we were able to get all those started, and they're still going today. So I feel really good about that.
So the chief after you, and the chief after that chief, our current chief, you were part of bringing them onto the department and mentored them. And I mean, how do you feel now knowing that they are?
I hired both of them. and it makes you feel really, really good, that the majority, by far the majority of people that we hired came on through the ranks, lieutenants, captains, and assistant chiefs, and fire marshals to do the inspection. So it was good. I felt our program was working. We were getting the people that we needed to not only do the job today, but to do the job in the future as well. And I think both Chief Galler and Chief Prinz did and are doing a great job.
And then you stayed a little bit after the 30 years to serve as public safety director. It was kind of a limited time, a new position, and that kind of thing. How long were you in that position?
2 years.
2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in that position, you kind of oversaw both police and fire in a way. It had what else were you
Worked
doing?
with both departments to try to be a liaison between the two departments. Worked with their budgeting, kind of a go-between the police and fire department with the township administrator, and just kind of help the administrator out a little bit and take some of that workload off of her so she could go to and do other things as well, because the township was still growing. I mean, there was development, all over, and she was very busy keeping up with that, as well as, the rest of the township as a nucleus as well.
So when you go back in your childhood days, Jim, so what made you want to go into this public safety realm?
Well, as a young teenager, it intrigued me. I was from a small town in Hamilton County, so they had a fire whistle blown at one of the industry. They had numbers that told the volunteer firemen what part of town the fire was in. And I was fortunate enough to attend some of those fires. Now, get on your bicycle and you could ride across town and no trouble at all. And it was interesting to me to see these firemen arriving on the scene, getting their turnout gear on, pulling hose, going into fires or working on a traffic accident. And it just kind of grew on me that, that it seems very interesting, and things are different all the time, and they were different every day, every call. So when I turned 18, and they were asking for volunteers in the town, and told myself, I said, I'm going to try that. I think that that would be something that I could really do. Of course, some of my buddies that I ran around with after school thought I was nuts, but so I started, taking the test for the volunteer department, and was hired, and that was in 68, and about 4 months after I joined the fire department, I happened to live across the street from the mayor of that city, and knew him very well. And he said something to me about, he says, we're looking for full-time policemen. Have you ever thought about that? And I said, well, yeah, I have. But, it's kind of along the same lines as the fire. Totally different, but along the same lines. As, you're helping people. It's different every day, and this and that. So thought about it for a while, talked to him again, and I tested for the police department as well. And they hired, I took the civil service exam, and I was hired in as a police officer then.
What would you say to young people today considering, fire service or the police service?
Well, it's totally different than it was back then, obviously, but I still think police and fire are probably one of the best jobs that there is. It's the feeling when you are able to get an injured person out of a car and on the way to the hospital, or helping somebody, saving their house, working with them, it really is a good feeling. You're not going to get rich, but in the police department, the police positions are a lot tougher now, because of, obviously everybody's got a video and everybody's got a phone, so you're on camera 24/7.
Right.
So it does make it a lot more difficult for a police officer, but they're still good jobs, good benefits, and the pay's getting better every day. So things are really something that I think that young people should really give it a lot of thought. I mean, everybody can't do it, everybody can't climb a ladder 100 feet in the air, and but I think the ones that can do it really should give it some thought.
Mm-hmm. So your wife grew up in this area, and when you moved your family here and you raised your kids here, are you glad you made that choice when you look back? Was it the right thing?
I have had the first time I had a regret was the first year I was here. After that, I mean, there's been some rough times, there's been some difficult times, but I have had no regrets whatsoever.
Okay, good deal.